Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Particularly welcome to all the new faces I can see. It's great to have so many people with us already on this Tuesday morning, particularly now it's a bit drier outside. Hope nobody has had too many issues with flooding, etc. My name's Matt Baird. I am the host and founder of the Social Housing Roundtable. We've been running this now for about 3 and a bit years. The idea was to bring people together initially during those pandemic years, so maybe it's 4 years, don't remember, to just have conversations around the key issues people were having at the time, because the best ideas and best ways to combat the problems we are facing was by sharing those issues. And we've now created this incredible community of more than 1,200 people. We've done, I think, around 150 of these. I will get official numbers sorted at some point. And we're on for doing 50 sessions this year. And as you will have known and found out for yourselves, it's free to attend and it is open to anyone and everybody. So I'm delighted to welcome so many people with us already. I've been running this alongside my recruitment business for 3.5 years. I set up on my own in February 2021. I've been specialising in social housing recruitment for about 11 years or so now. And then recently partnered with a company called Spirehouse. So I'm still a self-employed consultant working with the amazing team there. And the idea is that all of the recruitment work we do keeps this running for free. So the more of you who can reach out to us if you do require recruitment support, the longer we can keep this running. So thank you to everyone who already has. And I'd say if you are looking for support, please do reach out. Some of you will also know me as co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham, and I'm the founder of the Supported Housing Networking Group alongside Eden Bailey. I'm one of the founding members of the Supported Exempt Accommodation Forum in Birmingham. So lots of networking going on, and if anybody wants to get involved in any of those communities, do please reach out. So on to today. I'm delighted to welcome Amelie back to those who joined our session last year. And this year she's brought Sonali, Patel and Laura Shellard with us. And I'm going to get everybody to introduce themselves soon as the presentations go on. It's a really, really important conversation today. It's one where when Amelie introduced her research and the work that had been going on, I immediately said, yes, let's find a date, which is getting harder and harder with the roundtable this year. But I'm glad we've got one in relatively quickly. So without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Amelie to introduce Blue Marble Research, to introduce the work that she's been going through. All I will ask is that while the presentations are going on, please put any questions, thoughts, ideas into the chat box. I'll make sure they all get asked as we then move on to the more open discussion session. But after about 20 minutes, half an hour, and our presenters have shown their thoughts and the work that's been going on, we will move to a more open forum. So do feel free to dive in as you wish. But without further ado, Amelie, I'll pass across to yourself and Blue Marble Research.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks for that warm welcome, and to everyone who's joined today. I'm going to share my screen. We've got a few slides. Don't worry, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. Maybe Matt, give me the thumbs up. Is that all good? Super duper. All right. Well, I'll just introduce a little bit about Blue Marble Research and our work, and we'll get going. So we're Blue Marble Research, an award-winning market and social research agency. We conduct our research with a social purpose. Essentially, we want to have a positive impact on the world in which we live. And we try to involve people in this kind of key issues that affect their lives. I'm Amelie. I'm one of the research directors at Blue Marble. And through my career, I've worked kind of across these issues that we'll be talking about today, sort of energy, sustainability, across utilities, housing, transport, and public sectors. I also used to be a local councillor for a London borough, so I've spent a lot of time supporting and working with people who live in social housing. And Sonali, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, yes, I will. Thanks, Amelie. I'm a research director at Blue Marble, working there for a number of years. I'll put my hands up and say that I'm not an expert in the housing sector. So I actually came into this about a year ago. Amelie introduced me to the sector, and I worked on a project that we're going to talk about in a little while. But yeah, really, really pleased to be here and learn a bit more about the sector too.
Thanks, Sonali. So at Blue Marble, we believe that for a fair transition to net zero, and one that addresses and doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities, people should be involved in decision making and in policy formation around those key issues. And for us, it's particularly important when it's about people's homes and how they live their daily lives. We make sure, and we want to be sure, that we involve a diverse range of people in our research and our engagement, so that we can understand people's lived experiences and what will work for them when making change. And we do this through our public research and engagement work, organisations like Notting Hill Genesis, utility companies, local and national government, and the third sector. This can span things from talking to residents, local council residents about things like extreme weather and climate adaptation, talking with utility customers about how to use less water, or talking to people on low incomes about their energy supplier experiences for bodies like Citizens Advice. So one of these projects, and it's our work with Notting Hill Genesis, we'll tell you a little bit about. And in my role at a previous organisation, I was delighted to work with Laura and her colleagues to engage residents in the development of their sustainability strategy. So this was a couple of years ago now, but Sonali is going to update you in a moment on kind of some of our latest next steps on that. What did it involve? Well, Notting Hill Genesis were keen to kind of get a breadth and depth input from residents. And they wanted to find out about residents' needs, wants, and attitudes to sustainability and environmental issues. They wanted to look at that in the context of their homes, green spaces, and Notting Hill Genesis' corporate impact. They wanted to explore which issues residents thought Notting Hill Genesis should prioritise and how they should be addressed. And they also wanted to look at what ideas residents had for future engagement in implementing the strategy. So we supported them with a couple of things, and that was designing a survey, which was advertised in their resident magazine and via email. It achieved a really good response rate. Around 1,700 people took part in that. And that was from a various range of different tenures and property types. So around 30% of leaseholders replied, but also it was good to see that around 5% of people who replied were in temporary housing or supported housing. We also helped them with a couple of workshops, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So we worked with a smaller group of residents, around 21 residents, to explore the priorities in more detail. They committed over 4 hours of time to provide more detailed thoughts and look at the issues in kind of 2 different workshop sessions. In terms of engagement practice, we tried to be accessible by hosting a hybrid meeting. So some of the residents were in a room with us, but we also had a colleague online on Zoom with a group of residents on Zoom, using a large screen to kind of dial those residents in and to share views across the kind of physical and virtual room. We also had speakers from Notting Hill Genesis, but also external speakers to give a range of ideas and to allow the participants and residents to question those speakers so that they could consider different viewpoints and different ideas on the topics. And what was the outcome? Well, as well as a strategy that reflects resident voice on some of the key sustainability challenges for the Housing Association, it's also a strategy that commits to engagement and communication with residents in its delivery. Notting Hill Genesis recognises that the transformation of homes, green spaces and services will only be possible with the involvement and buy-in of residents. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sonali, who's going to talk about one of the ways in which Notting Hill Genesis is doing that and keeping itself accountable to residents in the delivery of its strategy.
Thanks very much, Amelie. So I'll go on to talk about a project that we worked closely with Laura with, to taking the kind of next steps for the sustainability strategy. So we worked with Laura's team again earlier this year, or sorry, at end of last year really, but it all came to fruition earlier this year to look at how to engage residents in the delivery of the sustainability strategy and really test it and make sure that it was working for them. So we set up a sustainability advisory group, which involved 15 participants who followed an application process and worked with Notting Hill Genesis to select participants to be involved. Blue Marble led the planning and design of the first meeting, and 13 made it to the meeting from those 15. We had 7 in person and 8 online, and we did it as kind of a hybrid style, which worked really well and something that residents really wanted to ensure that we carried on with in future. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, kind of pros and cons to a hybrid setup. So from the first meeting, it was very clear that some of the key outcomes were that residents care really deeply about the future and want to protect it for not only themselves, but also for future generations. The focus on sustainability resources and energy efficient housing exemplified this as well. And in order to help get their residents really felt that a new kind of decision making was important, and they wanted to recognise the importance of both individual influence and what we can be doing every day as individuals to kind of improve things, as well as the need for individuals to represent those in their communities. And they really felt that there was a role for them there to represent others from the housing association, but also the role of larger organisations putting as much effort and resources into the process as they are by leading sessions like this. So there are a number of key areas that kind of were highlighted as what residents wanted to focus more on from that meeting. So renewable energy was one of them, biodiversity and nature, involving communities. So as I say, kind of getting everyone involved more widely. Gardens and gardening was a very specific area that we explored, carbon emissions, and also recycling. I think we were going to move on now to talk a little bit about what worked well for this. I'm happy for others to jump in at this point, but as I mentioned, the kind of hybrid element of the meeting was really important. We did have people who were coming in from very far away, and we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. Truth be told, I had some hesitations at the beginning, thinking, would this work? Would it mean that everyone was included? Would it mean that people in the room felt more included than those outside of the room? But the way we designed it and the tech that we had with the 360 camera Teams meetings, moderators for both inside the room and outside the room, worked really well. And that was a real positive, and I think something that the residents came away with feeling very pleased that we could facilitate that.
Well, thanks, Sonali. And let's hand over and hear from Laura about how they've been putting some of it into practice and kind of next steps, and then perhaps we can get into the discussion more about some of the engagement practice and what other organisations are doing on that front as well.
Thank you, Amelie. It's great to be part of the session and the following discussion. I'm Laura Shellard. As Amelie said, I'm head of sustainability at Notting Hill Genesis, and we are a London-based housing association. So we're the third biggest, sorry, I should say, London housing association. Own and manage around 6. We reached out to Traverse and more recently Blue Marble to get fresh ideas and learn new approaches to involving people in the development of our sustainability plans. And I can say since then, we've learned a huge amount about how to make participation more open, attractive, purposeful. So much so that I can say our ambition or sense of what we need to do has increased tenfold. So we're always thinking about it and thinking about it differently, which is good. I was just going to share three reflections on what we've learned and future plans, and just to set the context. And I think going back to what Amelie was saying, when we set out to create a sustainability strategy, we knew that ultimately to achieve the scale of transformation required, people would need to understand what's being proposed and why they should collectively embrace changes to their homes, type of energy they're using, transport. And for us, this could only really work if people were involved in decision-making processes from the start. So we're always really clear on that. And as part of our sustainability strategy, and what we really want to continue to do is marry action on climate change, biodiversity and pollution with the top priorities of people living in our homes. So at our engagement workshops, which Amelie mentioned before, we ask questions like, what is the most important thing for you in relation to your sustainable home? What's essential for the future? And I think it's really important to continue asking these questions. So the first learning for us was that we got really rich perspectives and engagement from a small cohort of residents. And we realised, as many people may already know, that we need to create more space for dialogue at a local level where change is happening. And to sustain this, it would need to be embedded in operations and way of working. So we're working on building places and spaces so people can gather and connect, whether this is digitally through a new community-based app or through investment in social infrastructure like community hubs. I'm a firm believer that effective resident involvement and participation requires ongoing investment in people and time and resources. It can never be considered as an add-on. The second thing that we understood more deeply is that making participation inclusive requires a lot of thought and consideration, and is one area where we can only continually improve. At a local level, that might be laying foundations, building trusts, making sure information and materials are culturally relevant, but it's also opening up different opportunities for participation. So online surveys or old-fashioned meetings or community conversations, pop-up stalls at community days. What I would say is that the demographic profile of our residents is highly diverse, with many people who could be considered as having specific support needs. So making engagement accessible for Notting Hill Genesis really has to be a top priority, and we need to understand the ways in which people want to be engaged. And I think the development of sustainability strategy was a really good starting point in having those conversations. The third learning is that for engagement to be purposeful and for people to be able to feel that they have influence, it needs to be integrated into decision making. And again, this is another big area of learning for us. On sustainability, we've created a link with our Sustainability Advisory Group, which Sonali mentioned, and our internal lead group, so that resident recommendations feed into the creation of our annual action plans, and that our residents can hold lead group members to account in the progress they're making towards sustainability goals. There's still some way to go in incorporating resident voice across all decision-making areas, and that's something I'm really interested in. In terms of the future, we're working with residents in the creation of plans and projects for key areas of our sustainability strategy, areas that impact their sort of day-to-day lives the most, be it management of green spaces and the energy efficiency of homes. For energy efficiency, the plan we're focused on at the moment is working with our engaged residents, so those part of the Sustainability Advisory Group, on what good looks like in relation to improving homes, their perceptions, expectations, concerns, desired outcomes. And we're then planning to bring those residents together with people who've had their homes improved or are about to have their homes improved to find out what their specific needs, expectations, concerns, information, things they need to know are, etc. From this, we then want to co-create our first resident-led plan to improve the energy efficiency of homes. And this was, when we did the survey for the sustainability strategy, absolute top priority for people. The final stages of the project, hopefully, we'll see us work with people to turn their priority ideas and expectations into reality through the creation of new communication materials and a customer journey, which can be implemented by NHG project teams, our delivery partners, everyone involved in delivering energy efficiency improvements to homes. And we look forward to, I suppose, assessing the success of participation in this area through regular gathering of resident feedback and just continuing to learn. So that was it from me. Thanks, Matt.
No, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for sharing some insights. There's been some questions that have come in via the chat that I want to jump onto in just a moment. But Amelie, I know one of the things that I've kind of had sent through both privately and we've talked about before was a chance to kind of really explain what did go well and where were some of the struggles and where were some of the problems. And maybe that ties in a little bit with the question we'd had through from Steve, which was, why did you choose to only email the survey? How many surveys did you get out of 1,700 responses? Does this disenfranchise those who don't have access, etc.? So I don't know if you could just share some thoughts on what went well, where some of the struggles were, and then we can get into some of the more nuancing questions that are coming through.
Definitely, thanks. That's really helpful. I think it's clear that Laura and colleagues have definitely been on a bit of a journey around engagement practice and trying to do different things, try to kind of explore what will work well for residents. And it was super to be part of supporting them and supporting them in trying new ways of reaching and engaging residents on the sustainability strategy development. I think they recognised that they needed to try a mix of methods and to see what would work. The survey, I think we put quite a bit of time in making sure that it was, clear and simple and not asking too much from people in terms of making sure that it was engaging and that people would sort of take the time to fill it in. People might not want to do a sort of half an hour kind of survey, something that was kind of short and would allow people to pick some of their priorities, but also kind of making sure we had things like an open text box where people could put their kind of wider ideas as well. In terms of advertising that survey, I know that the team at Notting Hill Genesis put it in the community magazine and also email. So I think that's probably doing the both of those is why quite a good good response rate compared to other surveys that Notting Hill Genesis have done. But surveys, they're good, but I'm someone who's more of an engagement practitioner in terms of like wanting to speak to people and have that two-way dialogue. So that's why we really wanted to do these workshops as well, and do workshops in a way that could support participants to move beyond just kind of top of mind responses and allow them to kind of explore the topics in more detail. So we designed workshops that would have a bit of a learning journey, would have speakers, and not just Notting Hill Genesis speakers, but speakers on some of the key issues from outside of the organisation, so that residents could hear some different perspectives and have time to kind of question them and think about it, and discuss in groups to explore the kind of key topics that would go into the strategy. Those workshops, well, I think the hybrid did work well. It was good to be able to offer people that opportunity to do things from home, or come to a face-to-face meeting. I know, as someone who's got young kids at home these days, I really appreciate the ability to Zoom into evening things that I'm involved with in my local community. But there's definitely value and accessibility to people being able to come to an in-person meeting, and for Notting Hill Genesis to host that at their offices as well, and to bring people into that space, and to be able to meet kind of senior people working on the strategy development face to face. I think that's powerful too. So I think doing those kind of mix of methods was good. Certainly, you know, more can be done, and I know that Notting Hill Genesis are exploring more routes to involving people in the delivery of the strategy. But I think it's about trying things and seeing what works and what continues to work for people as our lives change, and as in, you know, at that period we were all changing kind of during coming out of COVID, new ways of engagement. And Sonali, what worked well for you during the setup of the Sustainability Action Group?
I think what worked really well is, what I was really impressed by and was really pleased to see, is that the residents that came were really prepared. So we'd built in time to send materials in advance so that people could really interrogate that in their own time and come prepared with questions, concerns, queries, the bits that are missing. So what was really nice is to see that level of engagement, and I think it's really important to build in that time to allow people to have a look at materials in their own time, so that they can come prepared and also come ready to interrogate. That's the point. They're there to engage, they're there to question, rather than just kind of sitting to a presentation and nodding, which is not what we wanted. We had lots and lots of voices in the room, which was really, really excellent, I think.
And I think there's something there. I mean, obviously the Sustainability Advisory Group, their main role and remit is around holding Notting Hill Genesis some level of accountability, I guess, in the delivery of their strategy as it goes forward. The kind of, you know, like a resident voice in that, monitoring how it's going and how progress has been developing. But I think what Laura was just speaking about is going to be kind of all the more important. Is how do you involve residents in the delivery of the actual projects and changes on the ground? So creating that customer journey around things like energy efficiency, making sure that, you know, people who have sort of pioneered and had some of the changes first to their homes, that they're able to kind of give feedback, and they're able to you know, connect with other residents who are about to start having changes to their homes, on kind of what that looks like and what's going to happen, and how they can get the kind of information and things they need. Or what do you feel?
I mean, I think it's fascinating. I think there's an awful lot that's clearly gone very, very well, and a lot that I think, you know, whenever you're looking at processes and when you're looking at, you know, new things that you're trying to implement, there's always, you know, room for, actually this went well and this could have been done slightly differently. On Steve's point there, did you find that was it always just email responses? Was there any other ways I guess, trying to engage in that initial outlet to try and encompass more?
Laura, I think I know some of your resident engagement officers like did go out and onto estates to advertise like the events and the workshops and the survey and things as well, didn't they?
Yeah, and I mean, I think we'd always say there's always more that we can do, and we're quite critical of ourselves, which is not a bad thing, and in terms of as Amelie was saying, we're on a journey with this, and we can only continually improve. But yet we did things like promote the opportunities with housing officers, and then housing officers through their estate visits or through their home visits then have the opportunity to talk to residents who might be interested in participating in these types of activities. We have other established groups, so we have a resident forum, and at the time that we did the strategy we had several other groups, so we were taking it to those groups and saying, you know, are you interested, but also what do you think about the engagement strategy? So there was some quite constructive comments about where we could advertise the opportunity and promote it as well. But there's always more that we can be doing. And I think I come back to the point that I made earlier, that I think this is a kind of long-term investment in creating those spaces to have those conversations and dialogue. So when you do something like this, you're not kind of creating something from scratch. Actually, you've already got those community networks, groups, digital platforms, whatever it is, to kind of go out there and reach people in different ways.
And that ties in really nicely with a point raised by Lizzie, who said that she rented from NHG for 16 years, during which I was a founder member of the Women's Environmental Network, as were several fellow tenants in the area. While managing a charity in Brent years later, I was the voluntary sector rep on the LSP. I'm interested in how landlord staff commission and consult as paid advisors, the many renters and leaseholders with a long-held interest and informed expertise in sustainability and community development. As you know, there are many hundreds of thousands of people who are involved in that. And I think this is the balance, isn't it, between, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, particularly Laura or Amelie and Sonali. We need, you know, there's often budgets for this, and evidently we've got staff, and you've already mentioned there, Laura, there's always more we can be doing, but then that's time against other services and things that are being run. Are we, or have in any of the services that have been utilised, you know, are we utilising paid? Are we paying tenants for their time? How is their time, I guess, being rewarded as thanks for the time maybe they're giving up for the support they are providing or the insight they're delivering?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I can try and tackle it first. We do have a resident involvement team who perhaps could answer this question better than I can. But we do, one of the things we do make sure we do is to not is to remove the barriers for people to participate. So if someone needs childcare, or if to attend a meeting, or if someone needs a taxi because, you know, they've taken public transport across London just isn't going to work for them in relation to their specific needs, we'll look at supporting and funding those things. So there is sort of an offer that sits with our resident involvement team, and I know that changes over time. I think there is a program of kind of like, you know, vouchers, and we're as an organisation, we want to make sure that residents know that we really appreciate and value their contributions. So there is a way of kind of social events, you know, get-togethers, dinners, a way of thanking people. But I think the other really important thing is making sure that people know that their contributions had an impact. So we're very conscious that following meetings there's a clear action plan, and that people who had sat down with residents and talked about things that needs to change come back to future meetings and explain progress that has been made on the issues and priorities that residents have brought to the table. So yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that.
Anything you'd add, Amelie or Sonali, at all?
I think across our wider research and engagement, as a practice, it's really important for us to recompense people who take part for their time. It's obviously always a decision made by our clients, but we do recommend that a voucher or financial incentive is important, not just to say thank you, but to mitigate against any kind of financial knock-on effect that it might have, be it something like, you know, needing to organise childcare so that people participate, or needing to take, you know, the expense of public transport and things. That's important for us.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alert Call works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alert Call won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
Fantastic. Yes, Sue, I can see you've got your hand raised. Do please come in before I jump to a question I was sent through by Jim. Sue.
Yeah, it's about financial sort of reward, sort of voucher system. I've just been asked by my local hospital about this, and one of the things on the consent form was that they have to tell the Inland Revenue that they're giving you vouchers and you're taxed on them. And this could be a barrier for people participating if you're going to end up mucking up their income tax records. And for a £30 voucher, and then you've got to spend an awful long time doing an income tax return form. I don't want the £30 voucher.
No, that is useful to be aware of. I hadn't heard examples of that, but I can imagine that there are people who take part in a lot of market research across the year, not just people who I guess who are wanting to work with their landlord and their housing association. There are people who take part in market research kind of across like all sorts of subject areas, and almost kind of might be doing that as a kind of side income, and then I can see why they would need to declare that. I wonder if there's
I don't know, because you see at the moment
you don't want people to get into complications, would you?
There's been quite a few sort of things coming through housing at the moment where lots of organisations are offering this, and everyone's seeing you in silos and thinking, oh well, it's only £30. But if you've got somebody active like me and a couple of others that are actually thinking, God, yeah, I really want to be involved, suddenly these people are unwittingly falling into an income tax trap.
That's really interesting. I think Sonali and I will definitely look into some of the details around thresholds and things on that.
Yeah, okay, thanks
be
for
aware
that.
of that for our participants in the future.
Thank you, Sue. So a question that comes through from Jim. Good morning. Good morning to the panel. What is your views on people abandoning vehicles and fly tipping with tenants raising complaints continuously without a satisfactory outcome? I heard of one tenant having this experience. Instead of the complaint about abandonment of cars and fly tipping became classed instead of help as a vexatious behaviour and not supporting sustainability. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on just that. I don't know if it ties in quite with what we're covering today, but thoughts welcome. I think we'll come back. Go on, Laurie. Yeah, please do.
No. I was going to ask Matt if you could explain it again. I could try.
Yeah. So what are your views on people abandoning vehicles and fly tipping, tenants raising complaint continuously without a satisfactory outcome, then being classed as vexatious and not being considered as helping to support sustainability? One tenant was trying to raise a complaint, but then became classed as it being vexatious behaviour about complaining. I think that's the point Jim's trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think fly tipping has a massive impact on areas and people, and particularly in London, it's a real issue, and it kind of comes back to sort of local management of areas, streets and estates, and the housing organisations, if they are the landlords, should be able to effectively deal with that. I mean, one of the things, I'm not sure if this quite ties in, that we're working on through the Green Spaces management plan that we're developing with residents is how we support and increase the number of resident monitors and do that in a way that is, imaginative, and also coming back to the point about recompensing people, that there is some incentive for people to do that. But I know lots and lots of residents who I talk to are really passionate about the look and feel and safety of their neighbourhoods, and just want to get more involved with things like how do we prevent fly tipping, how do we report and on these issues, and make sure that the landscaping and grounds maintenance contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of looking after the plants and the trees. So I'm not sure if that helps, but
without knowing the specifics of the example, it seems unfair that this person, having raised these complaints for, you know, for wanting a better neighborhood for them and their neighbors, has been labeled as vexatious. But it's, you know, it feels like actually, you know, a good thing that a resident is taking the time to report these kind of issues. But I think there's probably something there about the kind of two-way nature of engagement and the sort of almost the sort of balance in kind of how we behave towards each other. I mean, as a, you know, a housing association or a council landlord or research practitioners, you kind of sometimes need to make sure that residents do feel empowered to take part, maybe take part in engagement or voice their concerns about issues. But we also need to make sure that that's done in a way that's kind and listening on both sides.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a piece there around potentially like stigmatization and things that go with it. Tim, I'm going to bring you in, and then we've got a question from Dave.
Okay, I made a suggestion to my local council probably some time ago, about a year ago, where the estate I live on has a very long road. And at various points, it seems to be a favoured part where builders, anybody, fly tips. So I thought of this was a suggestion I put to them in an email, that anybody that has a door camera would be able to get 25 quid straight away for the evidence, and then another 25 quid after a successful prosecution. And typically, I've heard nothing.
Thank you, Tim. Good. I think anybody who's trying to engage and bring forward new ideas, it's one of those, isn't it, where it's difficult sometimes to get points.
Yeah, obviously, you know, that not everybody's got a door camera, but the fact is that we need some form of collecting evidence, and the OPLIS reply that we've got here where I live in Bristol is virtually next to nothing. I mean, you know, people report the tipped stuff, and within a few days it has been picked up and it's gone. But once the tipper has seen a successful route, as it were, then within a week there's another load, and then another load, and it just keeps going on, you see. So these people who dump this stuff, they're being paid by other people to take their rubbish away, but instead of taking it to the proper points where they would have to pay, they want to dump it on the street.
Yeah,
I mean, you're all aware of that anyway. This is not just a problem where I live. This is a problem throughout the whole UK because of the way that it's the dumping areas are worked out, how they're charged. You know, I mean, here in, as I say again, they are very highly regulated, but that's as far as it goes, and it only seems like a way just to collect money and do nothing else.
Thank you, Tim. I mean, did this come up at all in terms of any of the research that you undertook, or in terms of that sustainability strategy? Were problems around?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that. I think like residents really do want to talk about their communal spaces and you know, how things like greening and improving kind of local communal and outdoor spaces can both be good for sustainability, but also address some of these like ongoing issues like fly tipping, like you know, antisocial behavior and things that do crop up. But as well as the kind of those talking about green spaces, communal spaces, I think a lot of people wanted to talk about their homes, and particularly kind of with the changes that are going to need to come to people's homes if we're going to get ready for climate change, if we're going to adapt for net zero, like changing our heating systems, like changing our energy, you know, making sure we're more energy efficient, like making sure like we're ready for extreme weather, like, you know, extreme heat. You know, we've had the flooding this week, extreme cold, like our properties ready to withstand that, and are people kind of like, you know, how, you know, really keen that they as residents are involved in like what's gonna happen to the insides of their properties as well. So I think there was a lot of talk about outdoor spaces, but also I think people are really interested in kind of what's going to happen to their homes, and I can completely understand that. Like having a warm home, particularly in this kind of cost of living crisis, in this energy crisis context, like is so important to people.
I completely agree, and I think it's something which is that balance between the two. I did a session with the connections business over in it was an event at Edgbaston last week. It'll come to me in a moment. And one of the things there was about the future home standards and really trying to understand, well, actually, what that next phase look like, and is it feasible? How do people relate to it? How do people engage with it? And is there a genuine mindset of really understanding actually why, or is this just going to be changing the way we live?
And I know Notting Hill Genesis have done like some really got some projects underway in terms of like retrofit, and they've had some really strong engagement about that. Laura, I know one of your colleagues, Nadia, was leading on that. Are there kind of lessons from that?
Yeah, it was our first project where we were changing lots of things in the home. So we were working with residents really closely to, I suppose, improve the comfort and feel of homes and reduce significantly fuel bills. And when we first started talking to residents, and this is a small estate of 33 homes in South London, about improvements, one of the things they said really early on was that we don't want NHG dictating everything. We would like to see what the options are in terms of improvements to our home, and they were really strong on that, and in particular the heating solution, because that historically had been the issue, that people had old electric heating and it'd been really expensive to run and quite complicated to use. So what we did was basically we worked with an architect to come up with a couple of heating solutions. It might not be possible on all projects because you'll be limited by the building, the context, the area. But in this situation we were, and so we did a huge amount of work talking through people the benefits and considerations of an air source heat pump versus the benefits and considerations of an efficient new electric storage heater. It was really interesting because in the end we had to send installers into each home so they could explain exactly what was going to happen in terms of the works, where radiators were going to go, where the pipes were going to be run. People wanted to know, to have that detail, and that's completely understandable. So that was a really positive experience for us, particularly because the outcomes were fantastic and residents had felt that, you know, the works weren't being done to them, they were part of the journey, and they were able to make choices on the front door and door colours and how they wanted patio doors opening and all those kind of things that were actually really important to people. So we've had anecdotally great feedback in terms of how it's impacted people's day-to-day lives. So things like, you know, I don't have to worry about my children walking around in their nappies because the house is so cold. You know, I can get out of the shower and feel warm, whereas before it was freezing, and all those kind of things that you think, yeah, that must have been hard. So yeah, that was a brilliant project, and I think it's with those residents that we want to kind of get the learnings from in terms of what worked well, but also where can we improve, because there are a number of residents who have been brilliant at giving us constructive feedback, and that's what we really want. Who had a list of things to say, right, next time you do this. Sorry, Matt.
Ties in really nicely actually, because there's a few questions that are coming through. I'm just where we're slightly time, which was great that you're working with tenants to shape strategy. This was from Dave Skinner.
Yeah.
I'm curious though around the next steps of the journey. How do you envisage tenants inputting into ideas for solutions? How are expectations set around the feasibility of solutions? I.e., how do you not let people down when asked to put wind turbines on their homes? So I guess that's exactly what you're mentioning there, which is that expectations piece is absolutely key. And as is next steps and following up, I imagine, throughout this entire research, because there's no point in going and speaking to people about, can you help us with X, Y, or Z, or we want your input, and then nothing following up from it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. It's a really interesting area, and I think when we started out, we kind of didn't come to people with a narrow set of proposals. We just said, what are your priorities? What are your aspirations for your estate? And what are the things you'd like to change? So people would say, oh, the windows are really drafty, there's the terrible draft in the living room, or the hallways are dark, and so there was this kind of list of things that were really useful when it came to coming back to residents with a proposal. But the other thing, really early on, people just said, can't we have a gas boiler? And we had to, and this was in a estate where it was off gas grid, so there was no gas pipe work going into the estate, and we had to have that conversation really on about, actually, as you know, a nation, we're moving towards not emitting any carbon emissions from our home, which means fundamentally having a different heating source. And we had that whole conversation, but people came round to it, and at the end of the day, people did their own research. They went away, they talked to friends, you know, who worked in a certain sector, or, you know, someone who was an air source heat pump installer. And that was fantastic, because I remember one consultation we did, people, we were a sideshow, and actually people were having debates between themselves around why they thought something was better than, you know, something else. And they'd obviously done a lot of research and thinking about it, which is what we really wanted. I'm not sure that's a question, Matt, but yeah.
I'm going to bring Sonali and Amelie in on that question, and I'm going to go to Steve, because there's a load of questions coming through the chat, and I want to make sure we're touching everything. So Sonali, over to you.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say really quickly on that, that is something that we struggle with or have a challenge with whenever we research or engage with things, because there's two things that you want to have people feel is, one, that their voices are being heard and we're hearing what's important to them, but also what's happening with that feedback. And I think it's about explaining, we are going to have a conversation about what's important to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can achieve absolutely everything. And then a separate conversation of managing expectations of what is doable. Obviously, organizations work in different ways and have different capabilities, and just being really upfront about, these are the changes that can be made. These might be out of scope, but we're still listening to what's important to you. And I think that's just an important thing that we always bear in mind and balance in research.
And closing that loop, kind of getting back to people and saying, this is actually, you know, we've looked through what everyone said, and these are some of the choices we've made, and why. Closing that loop with people who've taken part, I think it's really important. But yeah, I was just reflecting what Laura was saying though about supporting people to have that discussion like amongst themselves as residents. Like it shouldn't necessarily be the landlord like dominating the conversation there. Obviously they've got a role to give information, but then, you know, and listen and act on the feedback. But when we're going to have to make kind of collective changes to things like our heating systems, you know, you can't have one property with a gas boiler, one with an air source heat pump, one on a heat network. You know, it's going to have to be collective change. Then residents are going to have to be supported to discuss different pros and cons of something, make the trade-offs, and sort of come to an agreement about what's going to work from them on almost like estate by estate level or street property level.
Thank you, Amelie. Steve, I'm going to bring you in.
Morning, Matt. Thanks. Where do I start? Just going back to what Laura was talking about, where you had installers go into each property and explain to the tenants where the pipes are going, what sort of work's going to be done, etc., etc. That's great. I you know, that's fantastic you're doing that. You're really engaging with the individual tenants. But as a country, UK, we're now at the point where we have to retrofit one property every 2 minutes to hit the target. Now, bearing in mind the lack of green skills at the moment, are you working on a project where you can engage with a wider community? When let's just say, for argument's sake, you've got a project for retrofitting 10 properties. Are you only engaging with those tenants, or are you engaging with the wider community to get the tenants talking, to get them to understand? Because you're not going to, in the future years, there's not going to be the time for the installers or for you to allow them to go into each individual property on every project to explain what's going to happen. There's just not enough work around there. So what is your project, you know, future plans for engaging the wider community as a whole?
Thank you. It's a really good question. And I probably won't do it justice. I think that one of the things we need to do is to prepare people psychologically for change. And there is something around the way that we as an organisation communicate with people about the benefits that change can bring. And as I said, marrying that back to the top priorities of people living in our homes. And we're starting to do, nowhere near enough, but we're starting to do a bit of work around taking projects as individual case studies and saying, this was the experience of residents and this is what it looks like and feels like to live in a home that has been improved, that has an air source heat pump, and this is what you might spend on your energy bills. But there's so much more that we need to do around this. And I was having an interesting conversation with someone in a construction company about the degree to which, from a technical process point of view, we can automate some of these things to start to achieve the scale and pace of delivery that we need to, because we're nowhere near that as a sector at the moment. But the resident engagement element is so critical, and all housing associations are struggling with, I think, positioning the message to residents that explains them why this is important, why you'll benefit, and that has an impact on how we, access into homes and the extent to which people want to cooperate with us and sort of embrace these changes. So yeah, there's so much more we could do in terms of kind of show homes and creating over time, sort of embedding those messages. And as I said, I probably can't do it justice, but you've given me something to think about more today. So thank you.
Sorry,
People who are making those changes now are definitely sort of, I suppose, in some ways, sort of pioneering some of the technologies and changes. Although to some extent, energy efficiency is not anything new, but as a nation, as we start to make those changes, then hopefully people will get more from like talking to their neighbours, talking to community groups, kind of word of mouth, of kind of understanding the sort of pros and cons of different options and things. And it's something that probably local and national government clearly needs to play a stronger role in communicating that level of change we need to make as a country too.
I'm going to try and fly through some questions from people who haven't raised one yet, Jim. I will come back to you. There's some questions from the chat that people haven't spoken, so I want to get theirs asked, and then I'll swing back round. So a point made by Nick Griffiths. I've just done a very large scale engagement project, nearly 20,000 tenancies, and I got operatives to hand out leaflets after completing a repair. It was a great way to spread info to customers, saved postage, and got a great deal of interest. We complete approximately 1,500 repairs a week, so over a fortnight we got to over 10% of our tenants. So definitely something to consider there. I'm going to come back to Lizzie's point in a moment as well. Because from Jim, a question that comes through directly. It'd be great to understand how customer engagement influenced the sustainability strategy in a way that hadn't previously been considered corporately, or changed the direction of travel for NHG. How does customer engagement interface with broader legislative and regulatory requirements from an ESG perspective, thinking about the 2030, 2050 targets and the FHS regs?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I know it's sort of got two parts to it, hasn't it? And I'm going to try and answer the first one, which is how residents influence this in a way that if we hadn't have done those engagement exercises, the strategy would have been different. So yeah, I mean, it's essentially the engagement activities formed the 4 priorities in our sustainability strategy, and it's as most strategies are, it's sort of a visioning document, so it's not particularly technical, and we didn't want it to be technical. We wanted to kind of be able to articulate the sort of aspirations, priorities, wants and needs of our residents. So I'm not sure whether we would have landed on the 4 priorities that we have in the current strategy, and whether we, within each of those priority areas, we would have chosen the right objectives. Because what we did following the meeting was we had 2 workshops. We went back to residents and said, this is what we've heard. These we think are the 4 priority areas. So homes, green spaces, waste recycling, using resources efficiently and net zero carbon. And these are the objectives we've developed based off of some of your recommendations and aspirations that we heard at the meeting. So yeah, we really wanted the link to be clear in terms of what people had said and then what we were going to go on to do in the strategy. The second bit on ESG. So you might need to repeat that to me. Is it how does our strategy tie in with ESG requirements and
customer engagement interface with broader legislative and regulatory requirements from an ESG perspective?
Okay. That's an interesting one, and I think there is definitely an overlap, but there is not complete alignment. And I think in terms of ESG, what we're seeing is that lenders and funders want to see there are two key areas for them. One is what we're doing around net zero carbon and reducing carbon emissions. So this is much more around how are housing associations contributing to wider global issues, tackling the triple planetary crisis. And the other is climate risks. And that does impact residents, but they're quite interested in terms of how resilient are you as an organisation in terms of protecting your residents and your homes for future climate impacts like floods. Whereas residents, we are all concerned with the impact on our day-to-day lives, which is really normal. So what does this mean for my community? What does this mean for my day-to-day life and the homes that the home that I live in? There is a definite alignment, because I said often you can, in terms of net zero carbon, you can marry the priorities of residents with the fact that we need to reduce carbon emissions. Okay, well that translates into a warmer home potentially, and potentially lower fuel bills if you get the improvements right. So that's my attempt at answering that question.
Thank you very much, Laura. Jim, I've got about 30 seconds for you, buddy, because we've got more questions to come. So Jim, over to you.
All right. Okay. Just interesting to see, alongside, the installation of your heat pumps, resource heat pumps, you're running gas alongside that, are you, for backup with it?
No gas.
No gas. So it's just purely that. So if that packs in, your tenant's going to be rather cold, aren't they?
So this was an estate where there was no gas historically. So it was built in the 90s, and it's one of those estates where I think probably as a cost saving exercise they didn't put in the gas infrastructure. So it always historically been electric, but everyone needs we've never had problems with electricity outages, and everyone obviously needs electric for lighting and power and other things. So what we need to do as an organisation is skill up our supply chain in terms of being able to maintain air source heat pumps and diagnose issues, and so that's kind of where our minds are focused at the moment.
And the other thing was, what grade were they at? Are they C2 or what? What level have you got them at on the EC?
Oh, in terms of the coefficient.
Yeah. Is it C2 or C1?
I'm afraid I'm going to get that wrong. Sorry, Matt.
Sorry,
Matt, that's fine. Okay, all right, Ken.
We'll come back to Jim. It's more specifics. I'm trying to keep it on topic as we can, but that was all. Stu, I'm going to bring you in.
Oh, hello. So we had a village which has got no gas, and we've done exactly the same, installed heat source pumps. And how they got engagement, they had a van come along that's actually got an heat source pump set up in it. We actually knocked the doors. We got the entire estate to come onto the van and have a look and see how a working one in practice. And then I said, this is a really rural village. If you've got all these heat source pumps buzzing under your bedroom window, you're probably not going to sleep. And because of that engagement, all of these houses have got Anderson shelters in the garden. So they actually put all of the noisy bits behind the Anderson shelter. So they actually took on board what tenants said. So that was the great bit. The sad thing was their energy bills went up. They're not warm homes. And what our authorities should have done was go back and say, right, this is not working. What else can we do to make this warm? As a result of that not happening, that's now spread across the entire borough. And we haven't got a cat in hell's chance of getting a heat source pump in anybody's property now, because the bad news went very fast. So my thing to you is you need to go back and just make sure that your objectives are actually achieved. So if you're telling people they're going to save money and it doesn't happen, you need to be working with them to find that solution, because in London it could go like wildfire across the entire, you know what I'm saying. It's bad news travels much faster than good news.
Thank you,
Really
Sue. I
interesting.
agree
Thank
with you
you.
there. Completely agree. I'm going to quickly fly through one or two comments that are in the chat, and then I'm going to wrap it up and go to final thoughts. So, Lizzie, who
Matt, I'm so sorry. I've got like another big workshop session, so I'm going to have to leave. It's done on 12. But thank you so much for having me part of this. It's been really interesting and great questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lizzie and Sasto probably asked my question, and clearly I meant how are tenants paid as consultants rather than as needing support, not vouchers, a salary or professional fee. So much high-level professional expertise exists that's apparently invisible to landlords, and I pay tax on all my income. It's not a barrier, and I think it's a really interesting point, one that we've raised before around utilising the skill sets within our tenancies that often are sometimes overlooked and sometimes stigmatised. There was a question thinking about how we balance what we need to do is demanded by the wider environment and how those things can impact our residents, e.g. the cost of electric energy versus removal of fossil fuel heating from homes. Lots of discussions around ASHP is still going on, and for example, the cost to run those. Steve had wanted to find out about how they're collaborating with other landlords and residents, so that's something maybe we can come back to in a future session, because I think that'll be that partnership working piece is absolutely key. There's slightly concerned there that it's sometimes priorities of residents aren't always the priority of landlords, and that's again I think is a session for us to really kind of deep dive into. And then people have had to go. Might be one or two I've missed, and if I haven't, sorry. I'm aware we've run over time. Amelie or Sonali, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the panel, just in terms of from your research perspective, what people are maybe doing wrong or what they need to start doing to really kind of make the impact that evidently you're starting to find?
I can jump in on a quick one. I guess there's two things that I've come out of this conversation with, which is working with organizations to make sure there is that wider involvement and it's not just those small people who are engaged and trying to find ways around that. And then the other one is that, I guess, that transparency point of what is achievable, what are you inputting to, which of your solutions can be taken forward and which can't, what's viable and what's not. I think those are the kind of key things I've come out with.
Amelie, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think for me definitely there is that question there. How do you especially on with residents who are living in kind of under housing associations or councils, it's like how do you do engagement that works both for people who have that kind of like the skills, the expertise, the literacy, to get really like involved in the technicalities of the topics versus making sure that it's accessible and inclusive and meets the needs of like quite diverse audiences. I think that's something we always need to keep challenging ourselves on. But it was really interesting sort of debate, discussion, and challenges today. So really thank you everyone for taking the time to take part. Do stay in touch with us. We post a lot about our different projects and things on our LinkedIn page. What is the best way for people to get in touch? Is it via LinkedIn on Blue Marble Research, or is there an email? That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, Blue Marble Research. That'd be super on LinkedIn. Yeah, and I'll that'd be great. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Amelie. Thank you, Sonali. Also, thank you, Laura, for joining us as well for the benefits of the recording. But for now, thank you everyone who's able to join us. We are back on Thursday with a second roundtable of the week. So plenty of engagement and conversation and things going on over the next few days. If you'd like details on that, please do reach out. But for now, Amelie, Sonali, thank you so much for today. And I look forward to seeing everybody soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.